The gun shop smelled like oil and old leather. Elias Vance stood near the counter, one hand resting on the worn wood, the other holding his hat. His wooden leg, carved from ash, fitted years ago after a bullet shattered bone he couldn't save, made a distinct sound against the floorboards. Not a thump, more like a deliberate tap. Patient. 3 ranch hands were already inside when he entered. Young, loud, the kind of men who wore their guns like jewelry. "Well, hell," one of them said, elbowing his friend. "Look who it is." Elias didn't respond. He'd come for ammunition, nothing else. The shopkeeper, a gray-haired man named Porter, glanced up nervously. He'd seen this before. Newcomers always tested the quiet ones. "Didn't know they let cripples carry iron," the second hand said. He was taller, with a scar across his cheek that he probably thought made him look dangerous. Elias set his hat on the counter. "Just need a box of 4440, he said quietly to Porter. The third ranch hand, younger than the others, maybe 20, stepped closer. Too close. "You deaf, old man?" "My friend asked you a question." Porter's hands fumbled with the key to the ammunition cabinet. "Gentlemen, I'm just trying to run a business here." "Shut it, Porter." The scarred one moved between Elias and the counter. "We're just having a conversation." Elias's eyes didn't leave Porter's face. "The ammunition." "You think you're tough." The scarred hand shoved Elias's shoulder. Not hard, but enough. The wooden leg shifted. Elias caught himself against the counter, steadied, then straightened. "I think I need ammunition," Elias said. His voice hadn't changed. Flat, calm. "Maybe you should try asking nicer." The young one grinned. "Maybe say please." The first hand, the one who'd spoken when Elias entered, laughed. "Hell, maybe he should get on his knees. Oh, wait." He looked at the wooden leg. "Knee? Singular." They all laughed at that. Elias stood there, waiting. Porter finally got the cabinet open. "Elias, I've got your—" The scarred hand grabbed the box before Porter could hand it over. "How much this run you, cripple?" $1.20, Elias said. $1.20. The hand turned the box over in his palm. "That's a lot of money for a man who probably can't hit what he's aiming at anymore." "Give it back," Elias said. "Make me." There it was. The line they always drew. Elias reached for the box. The scarred hand pulled it away, and the young one stuck his boot out. Elias's wooden leg caught it wrong, and he went down hard, shoulder hitting the floor, hat skittering across the boards. The laughter was immediate. Cruel. Elias lay there for a moment, face against the dusty planks, breathing steady. Then he pushed himself up, slowly. One hand, then the other. The wooden leg scraped as he got his knee under him, then stood. His shirt was dirty. His shoulder would bruise, but his face showed nothing. "Tough old bastard," the first hand said, grinning. "I'll give you that." Elias picked up his hat, dusted it against his leg, and put it back on. "The ammunition," he said to Porter. The scarred hand still held the box. "You're not listening." "Excuse me." The voice came from the doorway. A man in a clean coat and a marshal's badge. He wasn't local, just passing through on circuit business, but his eyes were sharp. "Everything all right here?" The ranch hand straightened up. "Just talking, Marshal." The marshal looked at Elias, then at the box in the scarred hand's grip, then at the floor where Elias had fallen. Looked like more than talking. "Misunderstanding," the scarred hand said quickly. He tossed the ammunition box onto the counter. "We were just leaving." They filed past the marshal, who stepped aside but watched them go. When the door closed, the marshal turned to Elias. "You all right?" "Fine." Porter slid the box across the counter, hands still shaking. "No charge today, Elias." "I'll pay." "Please, just take it." Elias put coins on the counter anyway. Exact change. The marshal was still watching him. "You're Vance, aren't you?" Elias picked up the ammunition. Heard you keep to yourself out on the North Range." "I do." "Good land out there. Water rights, if I remember." Elias nodded once. The marshal studied him, the wooden leg, the weathered face, the absolute stillness. "Those boys give you trouble often?" "Not often." "But sometimes." Elias didn't answer. The marshal pulled something from his coat pocket. A piece of paper, folded and yellow with age. He unfolded it carefully, smoothed it on the counter. A wanted poster, 15 years old, maybe more. The ink was faded, but the face was clear enough. Younger, harder. 2 good legs, but the eyes were the same. Elias Vance, the marshal read. Bounty hunter, licensed. Credited with bringing in Jake Marston, the Cowell brothers, and Samuel Black. He looked up. That you? Elias glanced at the poster, then back at the marshal. Was. Hell of a record. It's old. Black alone had a $5,000 bounty. The marshal folded the poster again. You retire. Something like that. What happened to the leg? Elias picked up his ammunition and turned toward the door. Conversation happened. The marshal smiled faintly. Fair enough. He paused. Those boys come back, you let me know. Won't be here. Where you headed? Home. Elias walked out into the afternoon sun, his shadow long across the dirt street. Behind him, through the window, Porter was explaining something to the marshal in hurried whispers. But Elias didn't hear it. He was already walking toward where he'd tied his horse, a gray mare with a patient temperament, when he heard boots on the boardwalk behind him. Hey! He didn't turn. Hey, cripple! Elias stopped, untied the reins, checked the saddle strap. The scarred hand and his 2 friends were coming down the street. People were starting to notice, stepping back, moving to doorways. We ain't done talking to you. Elias put his boot in the stirrup, his good leg, and pulled himself up into the saddle. The wooden leg settled into place. He turned the mare. You ignoring me? The scarred hand's voice was rising, angry now. Elias looked at him. Really looked. Took in the gun belt worn low, the way the other 2 flanked him, the tension in their shoulders. You should go back to work, Elias said. You should watch your mouth, old man. Who do you work for? The question caught them off guard. The scarred hand blinked. What? Your employer. Who is it? What's it to you? Just curious who's paying men to pick fights in town. The young one stepped forward. We don't answer to you, say... Victor Hale, the first hand said. He was the oldest of the 3, and something in his eyes said he was smarter than his friends. We work for Mr. Hale. Now what? Elias nodded slowly. That explains it. Explains what? Why you're here. The scarred hand's jaw tightened. We're here because we want to be. You're here because Hale sent you. Elias gathered the reins. To see if I scare easy. Nobody sent us. Tell him I don't. Elias touched his heels to the mare's flanks. She started forward, and the 3 hands had to step aside or get walked down. This ain't over, the scarred hand shouted after him. Elias didn't look back. Perhaps. The ride home took 2 hours. The land rolled and dipped wide and brown under a sky that went on forever. Here and there, patches of green clung to the low places where water pooled during the spring rains. Elias's land was north, where the valley narrowed and the creek ran year-round. 20 acres, a house he'd built himself, a barn that leaned slightly to the west but still kept the rain out, fences that needed mending every season, and water. Sweet, cold, reliable water. That's what Hale wanted, not the land itself, though he'd take that too, but the water rights. Control the water, control the valley. Elias had known it was coming, had known since Hale bought out the Morrison place last year, then the Carver Ranch 3 months ago. The pattern was clear. Hale was building an empire, piece by piece, and Elias's land was in the way. The mare picked her way down the familiar trail. Elias let her find her own pace, his eyes scanning the hills out of habit. Tracks, movement, anything that didn't belong, nothing today. But there would be. When the house came into view, Elias felt the familiar tightness in his chest ease slightly. Not much, never much anymore, but enough. He'd built it with his wife, Sarah, back when he still had 2 legs and a reason to smile. The windows were her idea, big ones, facing east so the morning light would fill the kitchen. The porch was his, wide enough to sit on during the evenings, watching the sun drop behind the far ridge. She'd been dead 6 years now. Fever, fast and brutal. He'd buried her on the hill behind the house, under a cottonwood tree that she'd loved. No marker, she wouldn't have wanted one, but he knew the spot, visited it most mornings. Elias dismounted and led the mare to the barn. Inside it smelled like hay and horse and old wood. He unsaddled her, checked her hooves, gave her grain and water. Then he stood there in the dimness, listening. The wind, the creak of the barn walls, the soft sound of the mare chewing. Nothing else. He walked to the back corner and moved aside a loose board. Behind it was a narrow space, and in that space was a rifle wrapped in oilcloth. He unwrapped it carefully. Winchester, 1873 model. The stock was scratched and worn, the metal pitted in places, but it was clean. He'd cleaned it 2 days ago, and the day before that. Elias ran his hand along the barrel, then wrapped it again and put it back. Not yet, but soon. That night, Elias sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and watched the stars come out. The valley was quiet. Somewhere far off, a coyote called. Another answered. He thought about the ranch hands, about the marshal, about the poster. People didn't forget. That was the problem. He'd tried, pulled himself out here, built a quiet life, kept his head down. But the past didn't care. It followed. It waited. And men like Hale? They smelled it, sensed the weakness, the isolation. An old man with a wooden leg and no family. Easy prey. They didn't know. Couldn't know. What it took to walk away from that life. What he'd left behind. What still woke him some nights, sweating and tangled in sheets, reaching for a gun that wasn't there. Elias finished his coffee and stood. His leg ached. It always did in the evenings, but he ignored it. Pain was just information. Inside, the house was dark and empty. He lit a lamp and sat at the table. From a drawer, he pulled out a leather-bound journal. Sarah's. She'd kept it for years. Recipes, thoughts, sketches. After she died, he'd started adding his own entries. Not often. Just when he needed to think clearly. He opened to a blank page and wrote, "They came today. 3 of Hale's men. Testing." He paused, pen hovering. They don't understand yet, but they will. He closed the journal and put it away. Tomorrow, he'd ride the fence line. Check for tracks. See if anyone had been scouting his land while he was in town. Tomorrow, he'd start preparing. Tonight, he'd sleep with the Winchester next to the bed. 3 days passed. Quiet days. Elias mended fence, checked the creek, repaired a section of the barn roof that had started to leak. On the 4th day, riders came. Elias was splitting wood when he heard them. 4 horses, moving at a slow walk up the main trail. He set down the axe and straightened, wiping sweat from his forehead. They stopped 50 yards from the house, close enough to talk, far enough to retreat. One rider moved forward. He was older than the ranch hands from town, maybe 40, with a broad face and expensive clothes. A foreman, Elias guessed. The kind of man Hale would send when he wanted to look reasonable. "Mr. Vance?" Elias didn't move. "That's right. Name's Garrett. I work for Mr. Victor Hale." "I know who you work for." Garrett smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Hale asked me to ride out and speak with you. He's been expanding his operations in the valley, and he's interested in purchasing your property." "Not for sale." "I understand, but if you just hear the offer, not for sale." Garrett's smile faded slightly. "Mr. Hale is prepared to be very generous. This land, it's isolated, difficult to work alone. He's offering 3 times what you paid for it." "I didn't pay for it. I built it." "Even better. You walk away with a profit, no strings attached." Elias picked up the axe. Not threatening, just picked it up. "I appreciate the offer. Answer's no." "Mr. Vance, you can tell Hale I'm not interested. Not now, not later." Garrett's jaw tightened. "Mr. Hale doesn't like loose ends." "Then he shouldn't have started this." The other 3 riders shifted in their saddles. Elias noted their positions, their hands, the way they held their reins. Garrett leaned forward slightly. "You're making a mistake." "Wouldn't be my first." "Mr. Hale always gets what he wants." "Then this will be a new experience for him." Garrett stared at Elias for a long moment. Then he straightened, turned his horse, and rode back to the others. They spoke briefly, too quiet for Elias to hear. Then all 4 turned and left. Elias stood there until they were out of sight. Then he walked to the barn and retrieved the Winchester. This time he didn't wrap it. He loaded it and kept it by the door. That night, Elias didn't sleep. He sat in the darkness of the house, the rifle across his lap, and listened. Around midnight, he heard it. Hoofbeats. distant, circling. He moved to the window and looked out. The moon was half full, casting pale light across the valley. He couldn't see the riders, but he could track them by sound. 3, maybe 4, moving along his north fence line, scouting. Elias watched until they moved off, then returned to his chair. At dawn, he walked the fence line himself, found what he expected: fresh tracks, boot prints where someone had dismounted, scratches on a fence post where someone had tested its strength. They were measuring, planning. Elias spent the day preparing. He moved supplies into the root cellar: water, ammunition, dried food. He checked every window, every door, noted the angles, the sight lines. By evening, he was ready, or as ready as a man could be. 5 more days passed. Nothing. Then, on a Tuesday morning, a wagon rolled up the trail. Elias stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand. The wagon stopped. A single driver, a middle-aged woman with gray hair tied back. She raised her hands. "I'm not armed, Mr. Vance." Elias lowered the rifle slightly. "Who are you?" "My name is Margaret Hale." Elias went still. She climbed down from the wagon carefully, moving slow. "I'm Victor's sister. May I approach?" Elias didn't answer, but he didn't raise the rifle either. Margaret walked forward until she was 10 feet from the porch. Up close, she looked tired, worn. "I came to apologize." "For what?" "For my brother's behavior, the threats, the intimidation." She looked around at the land. "This is a beautiful place. You have every right to keep it." "Your brother doesn't think so." "My brother thinks a lot of things that aren't true." She met Elias's eyes. "I'm trying to convince him to leave you alone. I wanted you to know that. Not everyone in my family agrees with his methods." Elias studied her, looking for the lie, the angle. "Why tell me this?" "Because I know what he's planning." Her voice dropped. "And I don't want blood on my family's name. Not yours, not his men's." "What's he planning?" Margaret hesitated. "He's hiring guns. Real ones. Not ranch hands playing tough. Men who've done this before." "When?" "Soon. Maybe a week." Elias nodded slowly. "You risked a lot coming here." "I know." She turned back toward the wagon. "I just wanted you to know. What you do with that information is your choice. But please..." She looked back. "If you're going to run, do it now, before it's too late." She climbed back into the wagon and left. Elias stood on the porch for a long time after she was gone. Run. He'd thought about it. Of course he had. Pack a bag, take the mare, ride until this valley was just a memory. He could start over. Somewhere quieter, somewhere Hale's reach didn't extend. But he looked at the house, the barn, the cottonwood on the hill. Sarah was buried here. This was where they'd laughed, fought, made love, built something that mattered. And if he left now, if he let Hale take it, then what had it all been for? Elias walked to the hill, stood by the cottonwood, put his hand on the rough bark. "I'm not running," he said quietly. The wind moved through the branches. "I know what it'll cost. I know what it means." The valley stretched out below him, wide and indifferent. "But I'm not running." He stayed there until the sun began to set, then walked back to the house. Inside, he pulled out Sarah's journal again and wrote, "They're coming. Real guns this time. Margaret warned me. I could leave. Should, probably. But I'm not. Whatever happens next, I chose it." He closed the journal and began to prepare in earnest. The week passed like water through fingers. Elias worked systematically. He dug shallow trenches at key points around the property, not deep enough to trap a horse, but enough to slow a rider in the dark. He moved his best tools and Sarah's few precious belongings into the root cellar. He cleaned the Winchester again, loaded it, unloaded it, loaded it again, and he waited. On the 8th night, they came. Elias was awake, had been for hours, when he heard the first sound, a horse's breath, the creak of leather. He moved to the window. Moonless night, dark as ink. But he'd lived on this land for 6 years. He knew every shape, every shadow. And these shadows were wrong. 15 of them. Maybe more. Spread out in a loose circle around the house and barn. Elias felt his heart rate slow, steady, the old rhythm returning, the one he'd thought he'd left behind. He picked up the Winchester and moved to the back door. One of the shadows was creeping toward the barn, torch in hand. Elias aimed, exhaled, and fired. The shadow dropped. For one frozen second, everything was still. Then hell broke loose. Gunfire erupted from every direction. Windows shattered. Wood splintered. Elias dropped low, moving fast despite the wooden leg, and fired twice more. One shot taking down a man near the fence, the other forcing two others to dive for cover. Someone threw a torch onto the barn roof. Flames caught immediately, spreading fast. Elias cursed, fired again, then moved to the side window. 3 men were rushing the house. He shot the first one in the chest, the second in the leg. The third made it to the porch before Elias's bullet found him. The barn was burning in earnest now, light flooding the yard, which meant they could see him. Elias dropped behind the overturned table as bullets tore through the remaining windows. He reloaded quickly, hands steady, breathing controlled. 7 shots, 7 men down or wounded, but there were more. He heard boots on the roof. Someone was trying to come down the chimney. Elias grabbed the kerosene lamp, lit it, and threw it up the chimney shaft. A scream, a body hitting the roof, then rolling off. 8. The gunfire was constant now, a roar of sound and fury. Elias moved through the house like smoke, firing from different windows, different angles, never staying in one place, never giving them a pattern. He hit 2 more, missed one, hit another. 11. The barn collapsed, sending sparks into the night sky, and in the sudden flare of light, Elias saw them. 4 men making a coordinated rush toward the back door. He fired 3 times, dropped 2. The other 2 broke and ran. 13. Then silence. Elias crouched behind the shattered remains of his kitchen, breathing hard, and listened. Hoofbeats. Retreating. Fast. He waited. Counted to 100, then 200. Nothing. Slowly Elias stood, looked out through the broken window. Bodies in the yard, in the dirt, by the fence. 7 dead. The rest had run. The barn was gone. Nothing but embers and ash. The house was shot to pieces. But Elias Vance was still standing. He walked outside, rifle ready, and checked each body. Made sure they were actually dead or too wounded to fight. Then he sat down on the porch steps, what was left of them, and watched the barn burn itself out. The wooden leg ached. His shoulder ached. Everything ached, but he was alive. And this was still his land. As the first gray light of dawn touched the eastern horizon, Elias heard horses again. He raised the rifle. But this time, it was the marshal. And behind him, a dozen townspeople. They stopped at the edge of the property, staring at the carnage. The marshal dismounted slowly. Jesus Christ! Elias didn't lower the rifle. They came for my land. Who? Hale's men. The marshal walked closer, taking in the bodies, the bullet holes, the burning barn. How many were there? 15. And you? The marshal looked at Elias, then at the bodies again. You did this alone? Didn't have much choice. One of the townspeople rode forward. It was Margaret Hale. Her face was pale. My brother? Wasn't here, just his hired guns. Where are the others? Ran. Elias finally lowered the rifle. They'll be halfway to the territory line by now. The marshal crouched by one of the bodies, checking for identification. Some of these men, I know these faces. There's paper on them. Figured there might be. Margaret climbed down from her horse. Mr. Vance, I'm so sorry. Not your fault. It is. I knew what Victor was planning. I should have done more to stop him. You warned me. That was enough. The marshal stood. Elias, I need to take you in. Elias nodded. I know. This was self-defense. Anyone can see that. But there's protocol. Bodies. Investigations. I understand. And Hale, the marshal's jaw tightened. I'm bringing him in too. This is conspiracy to commit murder. Maybe worse. Margaret closed her eyes. He's at the ranch. Then that's where we're going. The marshal looked at Elias. You need a doctor? No. You're bleeding. Elias looked down. There was blood on his shirt. He hadn't noticed. Just a graze. Let someone look at it anyway. One of the townspeople, an older woman named Ruth, came forward with bandages. Elias let her clean and wrap the wound. It was shallow. He'd been lucky. Or maybe not lucky. Maybe just practiced. When Ruth finished, the marshal helped Elias onto a horse. "Can you ride?" "Yeah." They left the property together. Elias, the marshal, Margaret, and the townspeople. Behind them, the barn smoldered and the bodies waited for the undertaker. By noon, they'd reached Hale's ranch. Victor Hale was standing on his porch, watching them approach. He was a big man, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. Until now. The marshal dismounted. "Victor Hale, you're under arrest." Hale didn't move. "For what?" "Conspiracy to commit murder, attempted land seizure, hiring armed men to assault a private citizen." "That's ridiculous. I don't know what you're—" 15 men attacked Elias Vance's property last night. 7 are dead. The rest ran. And witnesses, he gestured to Margaret, including your own sister, place you as the man who hired them. Hale's face went red. "Margaret, what the hell? I'm done, Victor." Her voice was quiet but firm. "I'm done watching you destroy everything Father built. You're making a mistake. The only mistake was not stopping you sooner." The marshal stepped forward. "You're coming with me, peacefully or not. Your choice." Hale looked at the marshal, at the townspeople, at Elias, still mounted, still holding the rifle. "This isn't over," Hale said. "Yes," Elias replied. "It is." The marshal put Hale in irons and led him away. The trial took 3 weeks. Elias testified. So did Margaret. So did the men who'd survived the attack, the ones the law managed to track down. The evidence was overwhelming. Victor Hale was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder and sentenced to 20 years. His assets were seized, his ranch sold, his empire dissolved like smoke. Margaret inherited what was left, a fraction of what it had been, and used it to pay restitution to the families of the men who died in the attack. Elias returned to his land. The barn was gone. The house was damaged, but it could be rebuilt, and people came. Neighbors he'd barely spoken to, townspeople who'd once avoided him. They brought lumber, tools, labor, not out of pity, out of respect, because they'd finally understood. The quiet man with the wooden leg wasn't weak, wasn't broken. He was just a man who knew when to be still and when to fight. Within 2 months, the barn was raised, the house repaired, the fences mended. Elias stood in his yard one evening watching the sun set and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not peace, not yet, but the possibility of it. He walked to the hill, to the cottonwood, put his hand on the bark. "I kept it," he said softly, "like I promised." The wind moved through the branches, and for the first time since Sarah died, Elias smiled. The problem with victory was that it never stayed quiet. 2 months after the trial, Elias was replacing rotted boards on the new barn when he saw dust rising from the south trail. He set down his hammer and watched. One rider, coming fast. It was Ruth, the woman who'd bandaged him after the fight. Her horse was lathered, breathing hard. "Elias!" She pulled up short, nearly sliding from the saddle. "You need to come to town." He wiped sawdust from his hands. "What happened?" "It's Margaret Hale. She's being threatened." "By who?" "Victor's old crew. The ones who got away that night." Ruth's face was flushed. "They're saying she betrayed them, that she owes them money for the jobs they didn't get paid for." Elias felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Where is she now?" "At the hotel. Marshall's out of town, won't be back until tomorrow." "She asked for me?" Ruth shook her head. "She doesn't know I'm here, but Elias, there's 4 of them. They've been drinking since noon and they're getting louder, talking about what they're going to do when she comes out." Elias looked back at the barn, at the work half finished. Then he went inside the house and retrieved the Winchester. When he came back out, Ruth was already turning her horse. "I'll ride with you." "No, you go home." "Elias, go home, Ruth." She started to argue, then saw his face and went quiet. She nodded once and rode off in the opposite direction. Elias saddled the mare and headed for town. The ride took an hour. The whole way, He thought about turning back. This wasn't his fight. Margaret had made her choice when she testified against her brother. Whatever came after, that was hers to handle. But she'd warned him, risked her family's wrath to give him a chance. Debts like that didn't disappear just because you ignored them. Town was quiet when he arrived. Too quiet. People were inside, windows shuttered. The kind of quiet that meant everyone knew something bad was coming and didn't want to be near it when it did. Elias tied the mare outside the general store and walked toward the hotel. 4 men were sitting on the porch, bottles scattered around their feet. They looked up when Elias approached, and one of them, a lean man with a black beard, grinned. "Well, hell, look who it is." Elias stopped 20 feet away. "Where's Margaret?" "Inside, hiding." The bearded man took a drink. "Smart woman. Knows what happens to traitors." "She's not a traitor. She testified against her own blood. What do you call that?" "Doing the right thing." The man spat. "Right thing. There's always one of you, isn't there? Walking around thinking the world works on right and wrong." He stood, swaying slightly. "World works on money, old man. And Margaret Hale owes us. Victor hired you, not her. Victor's in prison because of her. That makes it her debt." Elias shifted his weight, easing pressure off the wooden leg. "How much?" $500 each. That's $2,000. Your arithmetic's good. She doesn't have it." The bearded man shrugged. "Then she'll pay another way." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Elias felt the old instinct rising, the one that had kept him alive through a dozen fights he shouldn't have survived. The one that measured distances, angles, odds. 4 men, all armed, 3 sheets to the wind, but drunk men were unpredictable, dangerous in their own way. "Let her go," Elias said. "Whatever you think she owes you, let it go." "And why would we do that?" "Because I'm asking." The bearded man laughed. "You hear that, boys? He's asking." He took a step forward. "You killed 7 of our friends, old man. You think we're scared of you?" "I think you should be." The laughter died. One of the others, a younger man with a scar running through his eyebrow, stood up. "Big talk from a cripple." "Last man who said that is in the ground," Elias said quietly. The bearded man's hand drifted toward his gun. "You threatening us?" "Stating fact. There's 4 of us." I counted. "You can't outdraw 4 men." "Don't need to outdraw you." Elias's voice was flat, certain. "Just need to kill you first." The bearded man went still, his eyes locked on Elias's, looking for the bluff. There wasn't one. "You're crazy," the man said finally. "Maybe." Elias didn't blink. "But I'm the one still standing after 15 men tried to burn me out. So you tell me, you think your odds are better than theirs were?" The silence stretched. People were watching now from windows, from doorways, waiting to see who moved first. Then the hotel door opened. Margaret stepped out. She was pale but composed, and she was holding a shotgun. "Gentlemen," she said, "I believe you're on my property." The bearded man's eyes flicked between Elias and Margaret. "Your property?" "I own this hotel, have for 3 weeks now." She raised the shotgun slightly. "And I'm asking you to leave." "We're not done." "Yes, you are." Her voice didn't waver. "My brother hired you for a job. You failed. He went to prison. That's not my fault, and I don't owe you a damn thing. Your brother wouldn't have gone to prison if you hadn't testified. My brother wouldn't have gone to prison if he hadn't tried to murder a man for his land." Margaret's jaw tightened. "Now get off my porch before I forget I'm a civilized woman." The scarred man laughed. "You going to shoot us, lady?" "If I have to." "You ever even fired that thing?" "Once, when I was 12, killed a rabid dog that was threatening my horse." She met his eyes. "Didn't much like doing it, but I did it anyway." The bearded man looked at Elias again. "This how you fight now? Behind women?" "I'm not behind anyone, but," Elias said, "I'm right here, same as you." "Then draw." "You first." The bearded man's hand twitched. For a moment, the whole street held its breath. Then hoofbeats, coming fast. Everyone turned. The marshal was riding in with 2 deputies, and he did not look happy. He dismounted before his horse fully stopped, striding forward. "What the hell is going on here?" "Private conversation," the bearded man said. "Looked like a public threat to me." The marshal positioned himself between the 4 men and Margaret. "You boys got names?" We're just passing through. Then pass faster. The marshal's hand rested on his gun. I want you out of town in the next 10 minutes. And if I see any of you in this valley again, I'll arrest you for trespassing. We didn't do anything. You're drunk, armed, and threatening a woman on her own property. That's enough. The marshal's voice hardened. 10 minutes, starting now. The bearded man stared at the marshal, then at Elias, then at Margaret. Finally, he spat on the porch and walked down the steps. The others followed. They mounted their horses and rode out slowly, making a show of not being rushed. When they were gone, the marshal turned to Elias. You trying to get yourself killed? Just trying to help? 4 against 1. That's not help. That's suicide. Worked out? The marshal shook his head. One of these days, your luck's going to run out. Probably. Margaret lowered the shotgun, and Elias saw her hands were shaking. Thank you, she said to both of them. I didn't know they were going to. It's all right, the marshal said. But Margaret, you need to be careful. Victor had a lot of men. Not all of them are going to let this go. I know. You thought about leaving? Starting somewhere fresh? She looked around at the town, the hotel, the valley beyond. This is my home. Why should I be the one to leave? The marshal sighed. Because sometimes being right doesn't keep you safe. Then what does? Nobody had an answer for that. That night, Elias sat with Margaret in the hotel restaurant. The place was empty except for them. Most folks had decided to eat at home after the day's excitement. Margaret poured coffee with steady hands now. The trembling was gone. I meant what I said earlier, thank you. You would have been fine. I would have been dead. She set the pot down. Oh, or worse. Elias didn't argue. She was probably right. Can I ask you something? Margaret said. Go ahead. That night, when they came for your land, were you scared? Elias considered the question. Yeah. But you fought anyway. Didn't have a choice. Everyone has a choice. Not always. Elias wrapped his hands around the coffee cup. Sometimes the choice gets made for you, and all you can do is decide how you're going to face it. Margaret was quiet for a moment. My brother used to say that too, about choices. Your brother's in prison. I know. She looked down. Doesn't mean he was wrong about everything. No, just the important things. A small smile crossed her face. You don't pull punches, do you? Life's too short. They sat in silence for a while, drinking coffee and listening to the distant sounds of the town settling in for the night. Finally, Margaret spoke again. Those men, the ones from today, they'll come back, won't they? Elias wanted to lie. Tell her she'd be safe, that the marshal's warning would be enough. But lying never helped anyone. Probably, he said. What should I do? Learn to shoot that shotgun better. Keep it close. Don't go anywhere alone after dark. That's no way to live. It's the way things are. Margaret stood and walked to the window, looking out at the empty street. I thought testifying would end it. That putting Victor in prison would mean it was over. Nothing's ever over. It just changes shape. That's a depressing thought. It's an honest one. She turned back to him. Do you ever regret it, standing your ground? Elias thought about the barn burning, the bodies in the yard, the nights he still woke up reaching for a gun. Every day, he said. But you'd do it again. Yeah. Why? Because running doesn't make you safe. It just makes you tired. He finished his coffee and stood. I should head back. Stay. The word came out quickly, almost desperate. Then Margaret caught herself. I mean, the guest rooms are empty. It's late. You could start fresh in the morning. Elias hesitated. Please, Margaret said. I'd feel better knowing someone was here, just for tonight. There were 100 reasons to say no. To ride back to his land, to the silence and solitude he'd built his life around. But Margaret had stood on that porch with a shotgun she barely knew how to use, and she'd done it anyway. Sometimes you repaid debts, even the small ones. All right, Elias said. One night. The relief on her face was immediate. Thank you. I'll get you a room ready. 20 minutes later, Elias was sitting on the edge of a bed in a room that smelled like lavender soap and fresh linen. Through the window, he could see Main Street, empty and quiet under a sky full of stars. He thought about Sarah, about the house they'd built, about the promise he'd made to her. But promises got complicated when the world kept moving forward. He lay back on the bed, boots still on, Winchester within reach. Sleep didn't come easy. It never did anymore. Morning arrived cold and gray. Elias woke to the sound of voices downstairs, the hotel coming to life. He washed his face in the basin, straightened his clothes, and went down. Margaret was at the front desk, talking with an older couple about room rates. She looked up when Elias appeared and smiled. "Coffee's in the dining room." He nodded and headed that way. The dining room had 4 other people scattered across different tables. Elias took a seat near the window and waited. A young woman brought coffee. "Breakfast?" "Just this." She left and Elias sat there watching the town wake up. Merchants opening shops, a freight wagon rumbling past. Normal life, continuing like nothing had happened. Maybe that was how it worked. You survived something terrible, and then the world just kept going. He was finishing his second cup when the marshal walked in. "Thought I'd find you here," the marshal said, taking a seat across from Elias. "Mind if I join you?" "Free country." The marshal ordered coffee and waited until the young woman left before speaking. "I did some checking last night. Those 4 men, they've got paper on them. Nothing major. Petty theft, drunk and disorderly. But they're known associates of some rougher types." "Meaning?" "Meaning they might come back with friends." Elias set down his cup. "You telling me to leave?" "I'm telling you to be careful. You've made enemies, Elias, powerful ones. Victor's in prison, but his network isn't. The men he did business with, the people who profited from his operation, they're still out there. And they see you as the man who brought it all down. I was just protecting my land. Doesn't matter. In their eyes, you're a problem." The marshal leaned forward. "I can protect you in town, but out there on your property, alone? That's different. I can handle myself. I know you can. That's what worries me." The marshal's voice dropped. "Because sooner or later, you're going to run into a fight you can't win. And when that happens, I don't want to be the one who has to bury you." "Appreciated, but I'm not changing how I live." The marshal sighed. "Stubborn as a mule." "Been called worse." They sat in silence for a moment. Then the marshal stood. "Just watch your back, all right?" "Always do." After the marshal left, Elias finished his coffee and went to settle his bill with Margaret. "No charge," she said when he tried to pay. "That's not—" "You rode into town yesterday to help me. Nearly got yourself killed doing it." She pushed the money back across the desk. "The least I can do is give you a free room." Elias looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Thank you." "Will I see you again?" "Probably. Town's not that big." She smiled. "I meant, will you come back if I need help?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither of them wanted to examine too closely. "Yeah," Elias said finally. "I'll come back." He rode out of town under a sky threatening rain. The valley looked different somehow, sharper, more defined, like he was seeing it for the first time. Or maybe like he was seeing it the way it really was. Dangerous, beautiful, unforgiving. By the time he reached his land, the first drops were falling. Elias put the mare in the barn and went inside. The house was cold and empty. He built a fire, made coffee, and sat at the table with Sarah's journal. He hadn't written in it since before the trial, hadn't needed to. But now, with rain drumming on the roof and the day's events still fresh, he felt the pull. He opened to a blank page and wrote, "Helped Margaret today. 4 men threatening her over money they think she owes. Marshall showed up before it got bad. She asked if I'd come back if she needed help again. I said yes. Don't know if that was the right answer. Don't know if there is a right answer. All I know is some debts you pay, even when it's complicated." He closed the journal and put it away. Outside, the rain was picking up. Thunder rolled across the valley. Elias stood and walked to the window, watching the storm build. 3 days later, a boy showed up at Elias's door. He couldn't have been more than 14, skinny, nervous, wearing clothes 2 sizes too big. "Mr. Vance?" Elias was repairing the porch railing. "That's me. Miss Margaret asked me to bring you this." The boy held out a folded piece of paper. Elias took it, gave the boy a quarter, and waited until he rode off before reading, "Elias." The 4 men came back, brought 6 more with them. They're camped 2 miles outside town, near Miller's Creek. Marshall's trying to get help from the territorial office, but it'll take days. I'm not asking you to fight, just thought you should know. Elias read it twice, then burned it in the stove. He stood there for a long time, watching the paper curl and blacken. 10 men, armed, angry. The smart thing was to stay put, let the marshal handle it. This wasn't his fight, but Margaret had warned him about Victor's plans, had testified even though it destroyed her family. And now 10 men were camped outside town, waiting. Elias walked to the barn and saddled the mare. This time he packed extra ammunition. The ride to Miller's Creek took most of the afternoon. Elias approached carefully, using the low hills as cover, staying downwind. He found them just before sunset. 10 men, like Margaret said, camped in a clearing near the creek, horses picketed, guns stacked, bottles passing around the fire. Elias tied the mare a quarter-mile back and moved closer on foot. The wooden leg made it harder, but he'd learned to compensate. Step soft, move slow, use the ground. He got within 100 yards and settled behind a fallen log to watch. They were planning. He could tell by the way they talked, gesturing toward town, sketching in the dirt. One of them, the bearded man from before, seemed to be in charge. Elias counted weapons, rifles, pistols, knives. They were outfitted for a raid, not a conversation. He watched until full dark, memorizing faces, positions, habits. Who drank too much? Who stayed alert? Who kept watch? And who dozed? Then he pulled back, returned to the mare, and rode to town. He found the marshal at his office, going through paperwork by lamplight. "They're at Miller's Creek," Elias said without preamble. 10 men, armed for a fight. The marshal looked up. "You went out there?" "Scouted them." "Alone?" "Didn't see a posse forming." The marshal stood, frustrated. "Because I'm trying to do this legally, Elias. Get proper backup, make proper arrests. They're not going to wait for that." "You don't know." "I know men like that. They're not camping for fun. They're working up courage." Elias leaned against the doorframe. 2, maybe 3 days. Then they'll move. On what? The hotel. On Margaret. On anyone who testified. On anyone they think cost them money. The marshal ran a hand through his hair. "I've got 2 deputies. Even if I deputized every able-bodied man in town, we'd still be outnumbered. Then we make them come to us, on our terms." "How?" Elias thought for a moment. "They want Margaret, so we use her as bait." "Absolutely not. Hear me out." Elias held up a hand. "We don't actually put her in danger. We spread word she's traveling, make it look like she's vulnerable. When they move on her, we're waiting." The marshal was quiet, considering. "That's a lot of risk." "Everything's risk. This way we control where the fight happens. And if it goes wrong, then it goes wrong. But at least we tried." The marshal looked at Elias for a long moment. "You ever get tired of fighting?" "Every single day." "Then why keep doing it?" Elias thought about Sarah, about the land, about Margaret standing on that porch with a shotgun. "Because someone has to," he said finally. The marshal nodded slowly. "All right, let's talk to Margaret." They found her at the hotel, closing up for the night. When they explained the plan, her face went pale. "You want to use me as bait." "Only in appearance," the marshal said quickly. "You'd be safe the whole time. We'd make sure of it." "How?" "We spread word you're riding to visit family in Cooperville," Elias said. "Tomorrow morning. Alone. They'll hear about it. Someone in town will talk, intentional or not. They'll set up an ambush on the road. But I won't actually be going." "No. We'll have someone else in the wagon, dressed like you, just enough to make them commit." "And then?" "Then we hit them when they're focused on the wagon." The marshal's jaw was tight. "End this before it gets worse." Margaret looked between them. "This could get people killed." "People are already going to get killed," Elias said bluntly. "Question is whether it's them or us." She walked to the window, looking out at the dark street. "If I say no?" "Then we find another way," the marshal said. "But it might not be as clean." Margaret stood there for a long time. Finally, she turned back. "What do you need me to do?" They spent the next 2 hours planning. Margaret would make a show of packing, of saying goodbye to people. The marshal would deputize 4 men he trusted. Elias would position them along the road to Cooperville, hidden, ready. And Ruth, who'd warned Elias about the first threat, would drive the wagon dressed in Margaret's clothes. "She'll never agree to it," Margaret said. "Already did," the marshal replied. "Talk to her this afternoon. She's ready." Elias looked at the marshal with new respect. The man had been planning this before Elias ever showed up. "What time?" Elias asked. "Sunrise. We'll start early. Make it look like Margaret's trying to slip out before anyone notices." "They'll notice." "That's the idea." They finalized the details, assigned positions, and agreed to meet before dawn. As Elias was leaving, Margaret caught his arm. "You don't have to do this." "Yeah, I do." "Why?" He thought about it. "Because you stood up when it mattered, and that deserves something." "It deserves getting you killed?" "Maybe. Guess we'll find out." She held his gaze for a moment, then let go. "Be careful." "Always am." Elias spent the night in the livery stable, dozing fitfully among the smell of hay and horses. The wooden leg ached and his back was stiff from lying on hard ground, but he'd slept in worse places. An hour before dawn, he met the marshal and the 4 deputies outside town. They were good men, farmers mostly, but steady, the kind who didn't panic. Ruth arrived in the wagon, wearing Margaret's blue dress and bonnet. Even up close, the resemblance was convincing. "You sure about this?" Elias asked her. "No," Ruth said honestly, "but I'm doing it anyway." The marshal gave final instructions. 2 deputies would ride ahead, hidden in the rocks overlooking the road. 2 would follow a quarter-mile behind the wagon. Elias and the marshal would be closest, flanking positions, ready to move fast. "Remember," the marshal said, "wait for my signal. We want them fully committed before we move." Everyone nodded. Ruth climbed into the wagon and took the reins. "Let's get this over with." She drove out of town as the sun broke the horizon, the wagon creaking and swaying on the rutted road. Elias moved to his position, a small rise 50 yards from the road, with good cover and clear sight lines. He settled in behind a cluster of rocks and waited. The morning was cool and quiet. Birds sang. The wind moved through dry grass. And somewhere out there, 10 men were waiting too. An hour passed. Then another. Elias's leg cramped. He shifted position, trying to keep blood flowing, and kept his eyes on the road. Then he saw it. Movement in the rocks ahead. 3 men, positioning themselves on either side of the road. Classic ambush setup. Elias looked toward where the marshal was hidden, caught the faint glint of sunlight on metal, the signal that he'd seen them too. The wagon kept coming. Ruth drove steady, unhurried, playing the part perfectly. More movement, 4 more men emerging from cover. That was 7. Where were the other 3? Then Elias saw them, flanking wide, trying to cut off any retreat. They'd planned this, thought it through, smart. The wagon reached the kill zone. The men tensed, ready to spring. Then the bearded leader stepped into the road, rifle raised. "Hold up!" Ruth pulled the reins. The wagon stopped. "Well, well," the bearded man said, walking closer. "Miss Margaret, going somewhere?" Ruth kept her head down, bonnet hiding her face. "I asked you a question." "Leave me alone," Ruth said, pitching her voice higher, frightened. The bearded man laughed. "Can't do that. See, you owe us money, and we're here to collect." That's when the marshal stood up from cover. "Drop your weapons!" Everything happened fast. The bearded man spun, firing wild. Ruth dove off the wagon. The other men scattered, some returning fire, others running for their horses. Elias shot the nearest one, clean hit to the chest, worked the lever, shot again. Another man down. The 2 deputies ahead opened fire, caught one of the flankers trying to circle. The marshal's rifle cracked, once, twice, measured and calm. The bearded man made it to his horse, but Elias put a bullet through his leg. He went down screaming. In 30 seconds it was over. 4 dead, 3 wounded, 3 running hard for the horizon. Elias stayed in position, rifle ready, watching for anyone who might double back. But they were done. The fight was gone out of them. The marshal walked into the road, checking bodies. Ruth climbed out from under the wagon, shaking but unhurt. "Everyone all right?" the marshal called. The deputies reported in. One had a graze across his arm, nothing serious. Elias stood and walked down to the road. His leg hurt, and his hands were steady. That was always the strange part. During a fight, everything worked. after the shakes came. The bearded man was on the ground, clutching his leg. "You shot me, you bastard!" "Could have shot you somewhere permanent," Elias said. "Be grateful." The marshal zip-tied the wounded men. "We'll get you to a doctor, then you're going to prison." "For what?" "Armed robbery, attempted murder, take your pick." By noon, they were back in town. The wounded men were in cells. The dead were with the undertaker. And Margaret was standing on the hotel porch, tears streaming down her face as Ruth climbed down from the wagon. "You crazy woman," Margaret said, pulling Ruth into a hug. "You could have been killed." "But I wasn't." Ruth hugged her back. "And now it's over." Elias watched from across the street, then turned to leave. "Elias!" He stopped. Margaret was walking toward him. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. Just did what needed doing. You could have stayed home, let us handle it." "Wouldn't have been much of a fight then." She smiled through the tears. "No, I suppose not." She paused. "Will you stay? For dinner at least?" Elias looked at her, at the town, at the people starting to emerge from their homes now that the danger had passed. "Yeah," he said finally. "Dinner sounds good." That evening, Elias sat with Margaret, Ruth, and the marshal in the hotel dining room. They ate beef stew and fresh bread, and for a little while nobody talked about guns or death or debts. They just ate, and talked about small things, normal things. It felt strange, foreign, like trying on clothes that didn't quite fit anymore. But Elias stayed anyway, because sometimes the hard part wasn't the fighting. It was remembering what you were fighting for. 2 weeks of quiet followed. Elias worked his land, repaired what needed repairing, and tried not to think about how easy it had been to fall back into old patterns. The calculations, the violence, the cold certainty of pulling a trigger. He was mending fence on the east line when he heard a horse approaching. For a moment, his hand moved toward the rifle leaning against the post. Then he recognized the rider. Margaret. She pulled up 20 feet away, staying in the saddle. "Am I interrupting?" "Just fence work." Elias straightened, wiping dirt from his hands. "Something wrong?" "No, actually, things are—" She paused. "Things are better, quieter." "Good. The hotel's doing well, getting more travelers through since word spread that the valley's safe again." Elias nodded, waited. Margaret shifted in her saddle. "I came to ask you something, and you can say no." "All right." The town's organizing a harvest festival. First one in 3 years. They want to celebrate the end of Victor's control, the new growth. She looked at him. "They want to honor you, publicly." Elias felt his stomach tighten. "No." "I told them you'd say that." "Then why ask?" "Because they're going to do it anyway, with or without you there." Margaret's voice softened. "I thought you should know, so you could decide how you want to handle it." "I don't want to be honored." "I understand. But Elias, what you did mattered, not just the fighting, the fact that you stood up when no one else would. People need to see that acknowledged. They can acknowledge it without me standing on a stage." Margaret smiled slightly. "There's no stage, just a gathering, food, music, a few words from the mayor." "Still no." She studied him for a moment. "Can I ask why?" Elias looked out at the valley, at the land he'd fought for. "Because I'm not a hero. I'm just a man who didn't run. And turning that into something bigger, it's a lie." "Is it? Because from where I'm standing, you saved lives, mine included. I also took lives. Men who were trying to kill you. Doesn't change what I did." Margaret was quiet. Then she climbed down from her horse, walked over, and sat on a fence rail. "My father used to say something about the difference between a hard man and a cruel one." Elias didn't respond. "A cruel man enjoys the violence, seeks it out. A hard man does what's necessary and carries the weight of it." She looked at him. "You're carrying weight, Elias. I can see it. But that doesn't make you a villain. It makes you someone who understands cost. Pretty words don't change the bodies." "No, but they might change how you see yourself." Elias turned to face her. "Why do you care?" The question came out harsher than he'd intended, but Margaret didn't flinch. "Because you helped me when you didn't have to. Because you're alone out here, and I know what that does to a person." She stood. And because I think you've been punishing yourself for so long, you've forgotten how to do anything else." The words hit harder than Elias expected. He looked away. "The festival's on Saturday," Margaret said, walking back to her horse. "If you change your mind, it starts at noon." She mounted up. "And Elias, you don't have to carry everything alone. Some of us are willing to help." She rode off before he could respond. Elias stood there for a long time, staring at the fence post in his hand. Then he drove it into the ground harder than necessary and went back to work. Saturday came gray and cool. Elias spent the morning splitting wood, then cleaning the Winchester for the third time that week. By noon, he could hear music drifting up from town, fiddles and guitars, laughter, the sounds of people enjoying themselves. He stayed on the porch, drinking coffee and telling himself he'd made the right choice. By 2, the coffee was gone and the music was louder. Someone was making a speech. Elias couldn't make out the words, but he could hear the cadence. Formal, prepared. He went inside and tried to read. Sarah's books were still on the shelf, novels mostly, a few volumes of poetry. He'd never been much for reading, but she'd loved it. Would spend whole evenings curled up in the chair by the lamp, lost in other worlds. He picked up one of her favorites, something about a sailor and a whale. Made it 3 pages before he gave up. The house felt too quiet. Elias stood, grabbed his hat, and walked out to the barn. The mare looked up from her feed, ears forward. "Don't start," Elias muttered. She snorted. He saddled her anyway. The ride to town took 40 minutes. By the time Elias arrived, the festival was in full swing. Main Street had been closed off, tables set up, decorations hung. Children ran between the buildings. Adults stood in clusters, eating and talking. Someone had set up a platform where musicians played. Elias tied the mare at the edge of town and walked in on foot. People noticed him immediately. Conversations paused, heads turned. A few folks smiled and nodded. Others just stared. Elias kept walking, looking for Margaret. He found her near the hotel, helping serve food. She looked up as he approached, and surprise flickered across her face. "You came." "Apparently. I'm glad." She wiped her hands on her apron. "Are you hungry?" "Not really." "Well, you're eating anyway." She filled a plate with roasted chicken, potatoes, and bread. "Sit." Elias took the plate and found an empty spot at one of the long tables. A few people joined him. Farmers he recognized, a shopkeeper, an older woman named Clara who ran the bakery. They made small talk. Weather, crops, town gossip. Nobody mentioned the fighting. Nobody asked about bodies or bullets or burn marks. It was strange, almost normal. Elias was halfway through his meal when the mayor stepped onto the platform. The music stopped and people gathered closer. "Folks, if I could have your attention," the mayor said. He was a round man with a friendly face, well-liked but not particularly effective. "I want to say a few words about why we're here today." People quieted. "This valley's been through hard times. We all know it. Victor Hale thought he could take what wasn't his. Thought power and money meant he could do whatever he wanted." The mayor's voice strengthened. But he was wrong, because this community stood up. We testified. We fought back. And we won. Scattered applause. Now, there's one man in particular I want to recognize. A man who, when things got darkest, didn't run, didn't hide. He stood his ground and reminded us all what courage looks like. Elias felt his chest tighten. "Elias Vance, if you're here, and folks tell me you might be, I want to thank you on behalf of everyone in this town." The applause grew. People turned, looking for him. Elias sat very still, plate in front of him, hands flat on the table. Margaret appeared beside him. "You don't have to say anything. Just stand up. Let them see you." "I didn't come here for this." "I know, but they need it anyway." Elias looked at her, then at the faces around him. People waiting, hoping. Slowly, he stood. The applause got louder. Someone whistled. A few people started to stand as well, until half the crowd was on their feet. Elias raised one hand, not a wave, just an acknowledgement, then sat back down. The mayor smiled. "That's all we needed. Thank you, Elias." The music started again, and people went back to their conversations. But several came over to Elias's table, wanting to shake his hand or say thank you. He endured it, nodded, said "you're welcome" when it seemed appropriate. After about an hour of this, he stood and found Margaret. "I'm heading out." "Already?" "This isn't really my thing." She looked disappointed, but not surprised. Will I see you again soon? Probably. Town's not that big. Elias, she hesitated. Thank you for coming. I know it wasn't easy. Nothing worth doing is. He walked back to where he'd tied the mare, mounted up, and rode out of town. Behind him, the music and laughter continued, the valley celebrating a future he'd helped secure but wasn't sure he belonged in. The ride home felt longer than usual. 3 days later, trouble found him again, but this time it came from an unexpected direction. Elias was working in the barn when he heard shouting. He grabbed the rifle and stepped outside. A man was stumbling up the trail, half running, half falling. His clothes were torn, his face bloodied. Behind him, maybe a quarter-mile back, 3 riders were coming fast. Elias moved to intercept the running man. "What's going on?" The man collapsed at Elias's feet, gasping. "Please, they're going to kill me." "Who is?" "Bounty hunters." "But I'm not." He coughed, spitting blood. "Please." Elias looked at the approaching riders. They'd slowed, seeing him. "Get in the barn," Elias said to the man. "Now." The man scrambled up and ran for cover. The 3 riders stopped 50 yards out. They were professionals. Elias could tell by the way they sat their horses, the casual confidence in their postures. The lead rider was a woman, maybe 30, with dark hair tied back and a scar running from her left eye to her jaw. "That man's a fugitive." "Says who?" She reached into her coat and pulled out a folded paper. "Federal warrant, theft of government property, $500 reward." "Let me see it." The woman rode closer, handed the paper over. Elias read it carefully. The name matched, James Cartwright. The charges were listed. The signature looked official. "Seems legitimate," Elias said, handing it back. "Then you'll hand him over." "Didn't say that." The woman's eyes narrowed. "You're interfering with legal business." "I'm protecting a man who came to me for help." "He's a criminal." "Maybe, maybe not. But I'm not handing anyone over to 3 strangers just because they have a piece of paper." One of the other riders, a young man with red hair, moved his hand toward his gun. "We can do this easy or hard, old man." Elias didn't look at him, kept his eyes on the woman. "Your friend moves that hand another inch. I'll put a bullet through his shoulder." The woman held up a hand. "Easy, Colt." She looked back at Elias. "You know who I am?" "No." "Rachel Donovan. I've been doing this work for 12 years. I don't lose bounties. There's a first time for everything. You're making a mistake." "Won't be my first one of those either." Rachel studied him for a long moment. "I heard about you. The fight with Hale's men. 7 dead in one night. News travels." "It does. And normally I'd respect a man with that kind of record. But this?" She gestured toward the barn. "This is just stupid. That man in there is guilty, and you're risking your life for nothing." "Let me talk to him." "Why?" "Because I want to hear his side." Rachel laughed, but there was no humor in it. "His side? That's rich. You got somewhere to be?" She considered. "Fine, you've got 5 minutes, but we're not leaving without him." Elias walked back to the barn. Inside, James Cartwright was huddled in the corner, shaking. "They showed me a warrant," Elias said. "Federal charges. Theft." "I didn't steal anything." "They seem to think you did." "I was a clerk at the Army Depot in Carson City. Some rifles went missing, and they blame me." James's voice cracked. "But I didn't take them. I don't even know where they went." "If you're innocent, why run?" "Because nobody was going to believe me. The captain in charge of the depot, he needed someone to blame. I was convenient." He looked up at Elias. "Please. If they take me back, I'll hang. You got any proof? Anything that shows you're innocent?" "No, just my word." Elias looked at him, really looked. The man was scared, exhausted, desperate. But that didn't mean he was telling the truth. "Stay here," Elias said. He went back outside. Rachel was still waiting, patient. "Well?" she asked. "He says he's innocent." "They all say that." "He says the captain at the depot framed him." "And you believe him?" Elias thought about it. "I don't know, but I'm not handing him over until I'm sure." Rachel's jaw tightened. "That's not your call to make?" "It is when he's on my land." We can take him by force. You can try. The tension stretched. The red-haired man, Colt, was itching for a fight. Elias could see it in his eyes. But Rachel was smarter. You're going to get yourself killed over a man you don't even know? I've gotten myself killed for less. That doesn't make sense. Doesn't have to. Rachel stared at him, then let out a long breath. All right, here's what I'll do. I'll give you 24 hours to verify his story. You find proof he's innocent, we walk away. You find proof he's guilty, or you find nothing, you hand him over. Deal? How do I verify anything in 24 hours? That's your problem. But it's a fair offer, and it's the only one you're getting. Elias considered. It wasn't much time, but it was better than nothing. Deal, he said. We'll be camped a mile down the creek. Sunrise tomorrow, we're coming back. Rachel turned her horse. And if you try to run with him, we'll track you. Both of you. They rode off. Elias watched them go, then returned to the barn. James was standing now, hope and fear warring on his face. What did they say? I bought us a day to prove you're innocent. How? That's what we're going to figure out. They spent the next hour going over James's story. He'd worked at the depot for 6 months. Good job, decent pay. Then one morning, an inventory check showed 10 rifles missing. The captain, a man named Garrett Wolfe, had immediately accused James. Why you? Elias asked. I was new. Didn't have friends there, and I'd argued with Wolfe the week before about some paperwork he wanted me to falsify. What kind of paperwork? Supply requisitions. He was skimming, selling government supplies on the side. I caught it and told him I wouldn't sign off on it. Elias sat back. So he had motive to frame you. Yes, but I can't prove it. Where's the depot? 2 days' ride, Carson City. Too far. We'd never make it there and back before sunrise. Elias thought, who else worked there? Anyone who might back your story? There was a sergeant, Miller. He didn't like Wolfe, but he's Army. He's not going to testify against a superior officer. Maybe he would if the alternative was letting an innocent man hang. James looked doubtful. How would we even reach him? Elias stood. We send a telegram to the territorial marshal's office, have them investigate Wolfe. That'll take weeks, not if we light a fire under them. Elias walked to the house, James following. Inside, he pulled out paper and a pen. Write down everything you know about Wolfe's operation. Names, dates, amounts, everything. They won't believe me. They might if we give them enough detail to check. And if Sergeant Miller backs you up, even partially, that creates doubt. James started writing. His hand shook, but he got it down. A page of information about Wolfe's scheme. When he finished, Elias read it over. This could work, if Miller verifies even part of it. And if he doesn't? Elias didn't answer. Instead, he saddled the mare. I'm riding to town, sending this telegram. You stay here, stay out of sight. What if they come back early? They won't. Rachel gave her word. You trust her? More than most. Elias mounted up. Lock the door. Don't answer for anyone but me. The ride to town was hard. Elias pushed the mare faster than he normally would. By the time he reached the telegraph office, the sun was setting. The operator, an elderly man named Davies, looked up. Kinda late, Elias. Need to send an urgent wire to the territorial marshal in Carson City. That'll cost extra. I'll pay. Elias dictated the message, laying out James's claims and requesting immediate investigation of Captain Garrett Wolfe. He marked it urgent and paid double the normal rate. When will I get a response? Elias asked. If they respond tonight, maybe by morning. If not, Davies shrugged. Could be a day or two. I need it by morning. I'll do what I can. Elias left the telegraph office and headed for the hotel. Margaret was behind the desk. Elias, what's wrong? He explained the situation quickly. The bounty hunters, James's story, the deal he'd made. Margaret listened, then said, You're risking a lot for someone you don't know. I know. But if he's telling the truth, and if he's not, then I hand him over, like I said I would. She studied him. You really believe him? I think his story makes sense. Whether that means it's true, Elias shook his head. I don't know yet. You need somewhere to stay tonight? No, I'm heading back. Just wanted someone to know where I stand in case this goes wrong. Elias, I'll be fine. That's what you always say. He almost smiled. And I've been right so far. Except for the wooden leg. Except for that. Margaret walked around the desk and put a hand on his arm. Be careful, please. I will. He rode back through the darkness, reaching his land just before midnight. The house was quiet, door still locked. Elias knocked. James, it's me. The door opened. James looked terrible, pale, sweating. Did you send it? Yeah, we should have a response by morning. And if we don't? Then we figure out plan B. They sat in the house, neither sleeping. Elias cleaned the Winchester. James stared at the wall. Around 3 a.m, James spoke. Why are you doing this? Elias looked up. What? Helping me. You don't know me. Don't owe me anything. Elias thought about it. Someone helped me once, when I didn't deserve it. Figured I'd pass it along. Who helped you? Doesn't matter. They're gone now. James was quiet for a moment. Your wife? Elias didn't answer. Just went back to cleaning the rifle. I'm sorry, James said. I didn't mean to. It's fine. They sat in silence until dawn. At first light, Elias heard horses. He looked out the window. Rachel and her 2 companions, right on time. Stay inside, Elias told James. Don't come out unless I call for you. He stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. Rachel dismounted. Well, you got proof? Sent a telegram last night to the territorial marshal. That's not proof. It's a request for investigation. If Captain Wolf is dirty like James says, they'll find evidence. And how long is that going to take? Don't know. Could hear back any minute. Rachel looked at her companions, then back at Elias. That's not good enough. We had a deal. Sunrise. You got proof by sunrise, or we take him. Give me 2 more hours. No. Rachel, we're not negotiating anymore. She started toward the house. Elias raised the rifle. Stop. She froze. Behind her, Colt and the 3rd bounty hunter, a quiet man with a thick beard, reached for their guns. Don't, Elias said quietly. Nobody needs to die today. Rachel's eyes were hard. You're going to shoot me over a fugitive? I'm going to defend a man who came to me for help. If that means shooting you, then yes. You can't take all 3 of us. Maybe not. But I'll get you first, that's a promise. The standoff held. Nobody moved. The morning sun climbed higher, and sweat trickled down Elias's back despite the cool air. Then, from the direction of town, another rider appeared, fast. Davies, the telegraph operator. He was waving a piece of paper. Everyone turned to watch him approach. He pulled up, breathing hard. Elias. Response from Carson City. What does it say? Davies handed him the telegram. Elias read it quickly, then read it again. Well? Rachel demanded. Elias lowered the rifle. Sergeant Miller confirmed the story. Says Captain Wolf has been under suspicion for months. The marshal's office is opening a formal investigation. Rachel grabbed the telegram, read it herself. Her jaw tightened. They're also requesting James Cartwright be held for questioning, as a witness, not a suspect, Elias continued. The warrant on him is being suspended pending investigation. Rachel crumpled the telegram in her fist. This is over, Elias said. It's over. She stared at him for a long moment. Then she mounted her horse. You're lucky. So is he. Rachel rode off without another word. Colt and the bearded man followed, both throwing dark looks back at Elias. When they were gone, Davies let out a breath. That was close. Yeah. James emerged from the house, tears streaming down his face. It's true? I'm cleared? Not cleared, but you're not a fugitive anymore. Elias handed him the telegram. You'll need to go to Carson City, testify against Wolf. I will. I'll do whatever they need. James looked at Elias. Thank you. I don't know how to... Don't thank me yet. You've still got to face questions, and Wolf's not going to go down easy. I know, but at least I have a chance now. James extended his hand. Elias shook it. Davies cleared his throat. I should get back. Folks will be wondering where I went. I'll ride with you, James said. Start making arrangements to get to Carson City. They left together, and Elias was alone again. He stood on his porch, looking out at the valley. The sun was fully up now, burning off the morning mist. Inside, he sat at the table and opened Sarah's journal. Helped a man today. Don't know if he was guilty or innocent, but I gave him a chance to prove his case. Rachel said I was lucky. Maybe. Or maybe I just chose to believe there was still some fairness left in the world. Either way, he's alive. And sometimes that has to be enough. He closed the journal and put it away, then walked to the hill behind the house. Sarah's grave was peaceful in the morning light. Elias sat down beside it, back against the cottonwood. Getting complicated again, he said quietly. I know you'd tell me that's my own fault, that I should just mind my business. The wind moved through the branches. But I can't. You knew that about me. It's why we fought so much. He smiled slightly. And why you stayed anyway. He sat there for a long time, watching the valley wake up, thinking about choices and consequences and the weight of doing the right thing when you weren't sure what right was anymore. Eventually, he stood and walked back to the house. There was work to do. There was always work to do. But for now, on this particular morning, Elias Vance felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not peace, not exactly, but maybe something close to it. The peaceful morning didn't last. 3 weeks after James Cartwright left for Carson City, a lawyer showed up at Elias's door. He was young, maybe 25, wearing an expensive suit that had already collected trail dust. He carried a leather satchel and had the nervous energy of someone who'd rehearsed a speech but wasn't sure it would work. Mr. Vance? Elias was shoeing the mare. He set down her hoof and straightened. That's me. My name is Thomas Brennan. I'm an attorney from Denver. He adjusted his spectacles. I represent the Cartwright family. Elias wiped sweat from his forehead. James all right? He's fine, testifying as we speak. His information led to Captain Wolf's arrest. They're expecting a conviction. Brennan shifted his satchel. That's actually why I'm here. What do you mean? The Cartwrights are grateful, very grateful. James told them what you did, how you protected him, helped clear his name. They want to compensate you. Don't need compensation? Nevertheless, they'd like to offer you $500 as a token of appreciation. Elias went back to the mare's hoof. Tell them I appreciate the thought, but no. Mr. Vance, that's a substantial sum. I know what it is. Answer's still no. Brennan set down his satchel. May I ask why? Because I didn't do it for money. Then what did you do it for? Elias looked at him. Does it matter? The Cartwrights would like to understand. They're simple people, Mr. Vance. Good people. They don't know how to repay something like this. Then they don't repay it. They just live good lives and help someone else when they get the chance. Brennan was quiet for a moment. That's a generous philosophy. It's the only one that makes sense. The lawyer picked up his satchel again. Well, if you won't take money, perhaps you'd accept this. He pulled out an envelope. It's a letter from James and his parents. I think it would mean something to them if you read it. Elias hesitated, then took the envelope. All right. Thank you. Brennan extended his hand. It's been an honor meeting you, Mr. Vance. What you did, standing up for someone when no one else would, that's rare. Shouldn't be. No, but it is. After Brennan left, Elias finished with the mare and went inside. He sat at the table and opened the envelope. The letter was written in 3 different hands. James's was first, cramped and hurried. His parents' sections were neater, more careful. They thanked him, told him about James's life, how he'd always been honest, hardworking, how the charges had devastated the family, how they'd lost hope until Elias intervened. The mother's section ended with a line that stuck with Elias. You gave us back our son. That's a debt we can never repay, but we'll remember it every day of our lives. Elias read it twice, then folded it carefully and put it in the drawer with Sarah's journal. He sat there for a while, thinking about debts and gratitude and the strange way life connected people who'd never have met otherwise. Then he stood and went back to work. That evening, Margaret came by. She was driving a small wagon loaded with supplies. Thought you might need these, she said, climbing down. Flour, coffee, some cured meat. The general store had extra. Elias walked over. I can pay for... It's already paid for. Consider it thanks for helping with the bounty hunter situation. That was weeks ago. And I'm just now getting around to thanking you properly. She smiled. Are you going to argue with me about this too? Seems like everyone wants to give me things lately. Maybe because you keep helping people and refusing to take anything for it. Margaret started unloading supplies. Here's a radical idea. Let people be grateful. Elias grabbed a sack of flour. It's uncomfortable. Good. You need to be uncomfortable once in a while. Keeps you human. They carried the supplies inside. Margaret looked around the house, at the sparse furniture, the clean but worn surfaces, the single chair by the cold fireplace. You know, you could make this place a little more comfortable. Add some things. Don't need much. Need and want aren't the same thing. She set down a box of coffee. Sarah wouldn't have wanted you living like a monk. The name caught Elias off guard. He turned to look at Margaret. You didn't know her.
No, but Ruth did. They were friends years back, before... Margaret paused. Before she died. Ruth never mentioned that. She probably didn't want to overstep. People around here have been walking on eggshells around you for years. That's their choice. Is it? Or have you made it pretty clear you don't want anyone getting close? Elias didn't answer. He started putting supplies away, hands moving mechanically. Margaret watched him for a moment. I'm sorry, that was too direct. It's fine. No, it's not. I'm pushing, and I shouldn't. She moved toward the door. I'll go. Margaret. She stopped. Elias struggled with what to say. Finally, he just said, Thank you for the supplies. You're welcome. She looked at him. And Elias? The offer stands. If you ever want company, just to talk, have dinner, anything, my door's open. She left before he could respond.
Elias stood in the middle of his kitchen, surrounded by supplies he hadn't asked for, thinking about doors that were open and ones he'd deliberately closed. He thought about Sarah, about the life they'd built, about the silence that had filled the house after she died. He'd gotten used to the silence, had almost convinced himself he preferred it, but standing there now, he wasn't so sure anymore. 2 days later, the valley got its first real cold snap. Winter was coming early, and everyone could feel it. Elias was checking the barn roof when he saw smoke rising from the south. Too much smoke. Wrong color. Fire. He grabbed the Winchester out of habit, then realized it wouldn't help against fire. He saddled the mare instead and rode toward the smoke. It was the Peterson place. The family had moved in last spring, young couple with 2 small children. Their barn was engulfed, flames reaching 30 feet high. Elias tied the mare and ran forward. Peterson was trying to lead horses out of the barn, his face blackened with soot. His wife was pulling buckets of water from the well, throwing them uselessly at the inferno. The children! Peterson shouted when he saw Elias. They're in the house! Get them out! Elias ran to the house. The fire hadn't spread there yet, but it was close. Inside, he found 2 kids huddled in a corner, a boy maybe 6, a girl maybe 4. Both were crying. Come on, Elias said, reaching for them. We need to go. The boy pulled back. Where's Papa? Outside. He's safe. But we need to leave now. The girl reached for Elias. He picked her up, then grabbed the boy's hand. They ran out just as part of the barn roof collapsed, sending embers everywhere. Peterson's wife took the children, checking them frantically. Are they hurt? They're fine, Elias said. More neighbors were arriving now, Ruth and her husband, several farmers, Margaret driving the wagon from town. Everyone formed a bucket line, trying to save what they could, but the barn was gone. They focused on keeping the fire from spreading to the house and the fields. It took 2 hours. By the time they got it under control, the barn was nothing but smoking timber and ash. 3 horses were dead. The rest of the livestock had scattered. Peterson sat on the ground, head in his hands. His wife stood beside him, arms around the children. Margaret approached Elias. You got the kids out? Yeah. Good thing you saw the smoke. Elias looked at the ruined barn. They lose everything? Most of it. Barn, tools, feed for the winter. The house is intact, but... Margaret shook her head. They'll have a hard time recovering. Ruth joined them. We need to organize help. Get them enough to make it through winter. I'll talk to people in town, Margaret said. See what we can collect. Elias walked over to Peterson. The man looked up, eyes red. Thank you, Peterson said. For my children. Anyone would have done it. But you did it. Peterson's voice broke. I don't know what I would have if they'd been. They're safe. Focus on that. Peterson nodded, wiping his eyes. I don't know how we're going to rebuild. We put everything we had into this place. Elias looked at the smoking wreckage, thought about his own barn burning, the feeling of watching something you built turn to ash. You'll rebuild, Elias said. It won't be easy, but you'll do it. How? One day at a time, same way everything gets done. Over the next week, the valley came together. People brought lumber, tools, food. The men worked on raising a new barn, smaller than the old one, but functional. The women organized meals and childcare. Elias found himself working alongside neighbors he'd barely spoken to in years, measuring, sawing, hammering. The physical work was good, kept his mind occupied. On the third day, while they were setting posts, one of the farmers, a man named Dutch, spoke up. Heard you pulled those kids out of the house. Elias didn't look up from his work. Heard right. That was brave. That was necessary. Dutch hammered in silence for a minute, then, you're not as much of a loner as you pretend to be. That's so. Yeah. Loner wouldn't have ridden to help Margaret, wouldn't have fought off those bounty hunters for a stranger, wouldn't be here right now, building a barn for people you don't even know. Elias set down his hammer. What's your point? No point, just an observation. Dutch grinned. You can keep pretending you don't care about people, but we all see through it. You talk too much. My wife says the same thing. They went back to work, but Dutch's words stayed with Elias. Because they were true, at least partly. He had been telling himself he preferred isolation, that the land was enough, that he didn't need community. But here he was, helping, participating, maybe choosing. By the end of the week, the Peterson barn was standing. Not fancy, but solid. Enough to shelter animals and store feed. Peterson stood looking at it, his wife beside him. The children ran around excitedly, exploring the new structure. I don't know how to thank everyone, Peterson said to the assembled group. Don't thank us, Ruth said. Just help the next person who needs it. I will. I swear it. People started to disperse, heading home before dark. Elias was loading tools into his saddlebags when Margaret approached. You heading back? Yeah. Mind if I ride with you, at least part way? Elias hesitated, then nodded. All right. They rode in silence for a while, the valley quiet around them. Finally, Margaret spoke. You were right, what you told Peterson about rebuilding one day at a time. It's the only way that works. Is that how you did it, after Sarah? Elias's hands tightened on the reins. We talking about this now? We don't have to, but Elias, you've been alone for 6 years. At some point, you need to... Need to what? Move on. Find someone new? His voice was sharper than he intended. You think it's that simple? No, I think it's hard, but I think you're making it harder by refusing to let anyone in. Maybe I don't want to let anyone in? Or maybe you're scared. Elias pulled the mare to a stop. What do you want from me, Margaret? She stopped too, turning to face him. I want you to stop punishing yourself. I want you to remember that being alive means more than just surviving. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? My brother destroyed our family's name. I testified against him, watched him go to prison, and now I'm trying to rebuild something from the ruins. You think I don't understand loss? Her eyes flashed. The difference is, I'm trying. And you're just hiding. I'm not hiding. Then what do you call it? Elias didn't have an answer. He looked away, jaw tight. Margaret's voice softened. I'm not trying to replace Sarah. Nobody could. But she wouldn't want this for you, this half-life you're living. You didn't know her. Then tell me about her. The request caught Elias completely off guard. He looked back at Margaret, saw genuine interest in her eyes. Not pity, not manipulation, just honest curiosity. Why? He asked. Because I want to understand who you were before, who you're trying to protect by staying alone. Elias sat there on his horse, the evening sun casting long shadows across the valley. Part of him wanted to ride away, end this conversation before it went deeper. But another part, a part he'd been ignoring for years, wanted to talk, wanted someone to know. She was stubborn, Elias said finally. More stubborn than me, which is saying something. When we first met, I was tracking a man through Colorado. Stopped at a trading post for supplies. She worked there. Margaret listened, not interrupting. I asked for coffee. She told me they were out. I could see a pot right behind her on the stove. Elias felt a ghost of a smile. She said that pot was for customers, and I looked too dangerous to be a customer. What did you do? Stood there until she poured me a cup. Took 20 minutes. The smile faded. She saw something in me, something I didn't see in myself. Thought she could, I don't know, make me better. Did she? She made me want to be better. That's close enough. They rode on slowly, and Elias found himself talking more. About building the house. About Sarah's laugh. About the way she'd argued with him over every decision, but always backed him when it mattered. About the fever that took her. How fast it happened. How helpless he'd felt. I buried her on a Tuesday, Elias said. Couldn't work for a week after. Just sat in the house, staring at the walls. Finally, I got up and went outside. Started fixing the fence, because that's all I knew how to do. Fix things. Build things. But you couldn't fix her being gone. No. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. I'm sorry. For what you lost. Me too. They reached the fork where Margaret's path diverged toward town. She stopped her horse. Thank you, she said, for telling me. Didn't have much choice. You're pushy. She smiled. I am, but it's for good reasons. Doesn't make it less annoying. Probably not. She gathered her reins. Elias? What I said before about letting people in, I meant it. You don't have to be alone. I know. Do you? He looked at her. Really looked. Saw the concern, the care, the offer of something he wasn't sure he could accept. I'm working on it, he said finally. That's all I'm asking. She rode off toward town and Elias continued home. Inside the house that night, he sat with Sarah's journal. But for the first time in months, he didn't write. He just thought. About Margaret. About community. About the difference between being alone and being lonely. About whether 6 years was long enough to grieve, or if grief had a timeline at all. He didn't have answers, but for the first time he was asking the questions. And maybe that was a start. The next morning, Elias woke to find frost on the ground. Winter was definitely coming. He spent the day preparing, securing the barn, checking supplies, making sure everything was ready for the hard months ahead. Around noon, the marshal rode up. Got a minute? The marshal asked. What's wrong? Nothing, just wanted to talk. The marshal dismounted. Got word from the territorial office. Victor Hale's appealing his sentence. Elias felt his stomach sink. On what grounds? Claims the trial was biased, that Margaret's testimony shouldn't have been allowed because she had a financial interest in seeing him convicted. That's ridiculous. Maybe, but his lawyers are good, and they're arguing that the attack on your property was orchestrated by his men without his knowledge. You believe that? Doesn't matter what I believe, matters what they can prove in court. The marshal leaned against the fence. His hearing's in 2 weeks. They might call you to testify again. I'll be there. Figured you would. The marshal was quiet for a moment. Elias, there's something else. Word is some of Hale's old associates are putting money together, trying to hire a real lawyer, make this appeal stick. Why? Because if Hale gets out, their old operation can start up again. The bribes, the land grabs, all of it. Elias felt old anger stirring. They really think they can bring that back? Money makes people think a lot of things. The marshal straightened. Just wanted you aware, in case things get complicated again. Things are always complicated. True enough. The marshal mounted his horse. Take care, Elias. After the marshal left, Elias stood in his yard, looking at the valley, the place he'd fought for, bled for, and apparently wasn't done fighting for yet. He went inside and retrieved the Winchester, cleaned it, loaded it. Then he sat on the porch and waited for whatever came next. Because that's what you did. You prepared. You stood ready. And when trouble found you, because it always did, you faced it, one way or another. The sun set over the valley, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, beautiful and indifferent. Elias watched until dark, then went inside. Tomorrow he'd ride to town, talk to Margaret and the marshal, start preparing for the hearing, Tonight he'd sit with the silence and the memories and the slowly building understanding that his life was changing whether he wanted it to or not. And maybe, just maybe, that wasn't entirely a bad thing. He opened Sarah's journal one more time and wrote, "Margaret asked me to tell her about you today. I did. Felt strange talking about you to someone else, but also felt right. The valley's changing. Hale's trying to appeal. People are helping each other. I'm getting pulled deeper into things I thought I'd left behind. Don't know where this is all going, but I'm not running from it anymore. That's progress, I think. You'd probably laugh at how long it took me to get here, but I'm here now, and I'm trying." He closed the journal and put it away, then sat in the darkness of his house, listening to the wind and thinking about tomorrow, and the day after that, and all the days still to come. The hearing was set for a Thursday in late November. Elias rode into town 2 days early, partly to prepare and partly because Margaret had asked him to. "I need to talk to you," she'd said when she sent word. "Before the hearing, it's important." He found her at the hotel, going through ledgers. She looked tired with dark circles under her eyes. "You sleeping?" Elias asked. "Not much." She closed the ledger. "Victor's lawyers have been asking questions. About me. About my testimony. About my relationship with you." "What kind of relationship?" "That's what they're implying. That we're—" She paused. "That we have a personal connection that influenced my testimony." Elias felt heat rise in his face. "That's a lie." "I know, but they don't need truth. They just need doubt." Margaret stood and walked to the window. "If they can convince the judge that I testified for personal reasons instead of factual ones, they might get Victor's conviction overturned. Then we make sure that doesn't happen." "How?" "They're going to put me on the stand, Elias. They're going to ask about every time we've spoken, every interaction. They're going to twist it." "Let them twist. Truth is truth." "Is it?" She turned to face him. "Because the truth is, I do care about you. We have become friends. And if they ask me that under oath, I can't lie." Elias was quiet. The admission hung between them, complicated and dangerous. "Then you tell the truth," he said finally, "that we're friends, that I helped you because it was right, not because of anything else, that your testimony was based on what you saw and knew about Victor's operation. And if they don't believe me, then they don't believe you, but you don't compromise yourself by lying." Margaret looked at him for a long moment. "You make it sound simple." "It is simple. Doing it is what's hard." She managed a small smile. "How do you do that?" "What?" "Cut through all the noise, see things so clearly." "I don't see things clearly. I just see what matters and ignore the rest." "I wish I could do that." "You can. You already have. You testified against your own brother when it mattered." Margaret walked back to the desk and sat down heavily. "That feels like a lifetime ago." "It was 3 months. A lot can happen in 3 months." Elias pulled up a chair and sat across from her. "What are you really worried about?" She was quiet for a moment, then said, "That I made a mistake. That testifying destroyed my family for nothing. That Victor is going to get out and it'll all have been pointless." "It wasn't pointless. He tried to kill me. You told the truth about that. But what if the truth isn't enough?" Elias leaned forward. "Then we deal with what comes. But you don't regret doing the right thing just because it's hard. Even if it costs everything? Especially then. That's when it matters most." Margaret met his eyes, and something passed between them. Understanding, maybe. Or recognition. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For being steady, when everything else is chaos." Elias didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. That night he stayed at the hotel again. Couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about the hearing, about what might happen if Hale got out. Around midnight, he heard a knock on his door. He grabbed the Winchester before answering. "Who is it?" "It's me." "Margaret." Elias opened the door. She was still dressed, carrying a bottle and 2 glasses. "Can't sleep either?" she asked. "No." "Want company?" He should have said no. Should have sent her away, but he stepped aside instead. Margaret came in and set the glasses on the small table. "Whiskey, from my father's collection. Figured tonight warranted it." She poured 2 fingers in each glass and handed one to Elias. To truth, she said, raising hers. To truth, Elias echoed. They drank. The whiskey burned going down, warm and familiar. Margaret sat in the room's single chair. Elias leaned against the wall. Tell me something, Margaret said. If Victor gets out, what do you do? Same thing I did before.
Fight? If I have to. And if he comes after you again, with more men, better planning, then I'll deal with it. Margaret shook her head. You can't just keep fighting forever. Why not? Because eventually you'll lose. Everyone does. Elias took another drink. Maybe, but not today. That's not a plan, Elias. That's just stubbornness. It's kept me alive this long. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the dark street. I'm scared. I don't want to admit it, but I am. Scared of what Victor might do if he gets out. Scared of what the lawyers are going to ask me. Scared that everything I've built since the trial is going to crumble. Fear's natural. How do you handle it? I don't. I just keep moving forward despite it. Margaret turned back to him. Is that what Sarah taught you? The question surprised him. What makes you think that?
Because you loved her. And people we love teach us how to live. Elias was quiet, remembering. She taught me that fear was just another kind of information, that you acknowledge it, then decide what to do anyway. Sounds like a wise woman. She was. He finished his whiskey. But she also knew when to stop fighting, when to let things go. I never learned that part. Maybe because you haven't found something worth letting go for. Maybe. Margaret poured them each another drink. Can I ask you something personal? You're already in my room at midnight with whiskey. Might as well. She smiled at that. Do you think you'll ever let someone in again, the way you let Sarah in? Elias looked at his glass, at the amber liquid catching lamplight. I don't know. Part of me doesn't want to risk it. The pain when it ends. He shook his head. I'm not sure I could survive that again. And the other part? The other part knows that Sarah would call me a fool for wasting what's left of my life protecting a ghost. Margaret moved closer. She would be right. Doesn't make it easier. No, but it makes it necessary. They stood there, close enough that Elias could smell the lavender soap she used, could see the silver flecks in her eyes. For a moment he thought about closing the distance, about taking the risk, but he didn't. Instead he stepped back. You should go, he said quietly. People talk, and you don't need more ammunition for those lawyers. Margaret's expression flickered, disappointment, maybe, or relief. You're probably right. She left the bottle and took her glass. At the door she paused. Elias, whatever happens tomorrow at the hearing, thank you for standing with me. Haven't done it yet. You will. I know you will. After she left, Elias sat in the chair and finished the bottle, thinking about choices and timing and the cruel mathematics of almost. The hearing started at 9. The courtroom was packed, townspeople, reporters, lawyers. Victor Hale sat at the defendant's table in prison clothes, thinner than Elias remembered but still carrying himself with arrogance. Hale's lawyer was a man named Ashford, expensive suit and practiced smile. He called witness after witness, building a narrative that Hale had been set up by disloyal men, that Margaret's testimony was motivated by personal gain, that the whole trial had been a rush to judgment. Elias sat in the back and watched. Waited. Around noon, they called Margaret to the stand. Ashford circled her like a predator. Miss Hale, you testified against your own brother. That's an unusual choice. He tried to have a man killed. That's an unusual crime. Or so you claim, but isn't it true that you stood to inherit your brother's property if he was convicted? I didn't want his property. I wanted justice, a convenient answer, but the fact remains, you benefited financially from his conviction. Margaret's jaw tightened. I benefited from not having to watch my brother destroy more lives. How noble, Ashford smiled. Tell me, Miss Hale, what is your relationship with Elias Vance? The courtroom went quiet. We're friends, Margaret said carefully. Just friends? You've had multiple private meetings with him. You've visited his property. He stayed at your hotel. Some might say that's more than friendship. Some might say you're making implications that aren't there. Am I? Or are you protecting a man who killed 7 people and needed your testimony to legitimize it? The prosecutor objected. The judge sustained it. But the damage was done, the seed of doubt planted. Ashford pressed harder. Isn't it true that Mr. Vance has a violent past? That he was a bounty hunter who killed dozens of men? He was a lawman doing his job. A lawman who lost his badge after a shooting was ruled excessive force. A lawman who disappeared for years before resurfacing here. Margaret glanced at Elias. He kept his face neutral. I don't know his entire history, Margaret said. I know he protected his property from an armed assault. That's what I testified to. And you expect this court to believe you're an objective witness when you clearly have personal feelings for the defendant? Objection. The prosecutor was on his feet. Counsel is badgering the witness. I'll rephrase, Ashford said smoothly. Miss Hale, do you have romantic feelings for Elias Vance? The courtroom held its breath. Margaret looked at Ashford, then at Elias, then back at the lawyer. That's irrelevant to what happened, she said. Answer the question. My feelings don't change the facts. Your brother hired men to attack Mr. Vance's property. I saw the evidence. I heard the confession from one of the surviving attackers. Those are facts, not feelings. You're evading. I'm telling the truth. Whether you choose to hear it is your problem. The judge intervened. That's enough, Mr. Ashford. Move on. Ashford tried a few more angles, but Margaret held firm. When she finally stepped down, she looked exhausted but unbroken. Then they called Elias. He walked to the stand, conscious of every eye on him, swore his oath, sat down. Ashford wasted no time. Mr. Vance, you killed 7 men on the night in question, correct? Yes. And you claim this was self-defense. It was self-defense. 15 men against 1, and yet you survived without serious injury. Remarkable. I had cover, high ground. They didn't. Or perhaps you're simply very good at killing people, given your history. Elias met his eyes. I'm good at surviving. There's a difference. Is there? Let's examine that history. You were a bounty hunter for... Ashford checked his notes. 12 years. How many men did you kill in that time? Don't know the exact number. Estimate? 30, maybe more. Gasps from the courtroom. Ashford smiled. 30 men. And you expect us to believe you're a peaceful farmer? I expect you to believe the truth. I defended my land from men who came to kill me. Or perhaps you saw an opportunity to eliminate your competition, to become the hero and win the affection of a certain woman. That's a story you're telling, not what happened. Ashford leaned against the stand. Mr. Vance, isn't it true that you and Margaret Hale have developed a romantic relationship? No. You've had private meetings, late-night conversations. She brought you supplies, visited your property alone. We're friends, that's all. Just friends. How convenient. Elias felt anger rising but kept it controlled. Believing what you want doesn't make it true. Neither does lying under oath. The prosecutor objected again. The judge was getting annoyed, but Ashford had accomplished what he wanted, painted Elias and Margaret as conspirators, motivated by something other than truth. The hearing continued for 2 more hours. More witnesses, more arguments. Finally, the judge called for closing statements. The prosecutor went first, methodically laying out the evidence, the bodies, the weapons, the testimony from survivors, the clear pattern of Victor Hale orchestrating the attack. Ashford countered with doubt, questions about motives, relationships, the reliability of witnesses with personal stakes. When both sides finished, the judge looked tired. I'll review the evidence and issue a ruling within 48 hours, he said. Court adjourned. Everyone stood as the judge left. Hale was led away, but not before he caught Elias's eye and smiled. Outside the courthouse, Margaret found Elias in the crowd. That was brutal, she said. Could have been worse. How? We're both still standing. The marshal joined them. The judge looked skeptical. Ashford did a good job muddying the water. So what do we do? Margaret asked. Wait, see what he decides. They spent the next 2 days in limbo. Elias stayed in town, working odd jobs to keep busy. Margaret tried to run the hotel but couldn't focus. On Friday afternoon, word came. The judge had reached a decision. They gathered in the courtroom again. Hale was brought in, looking confident. Ashford whispered something to him, and he nodded. The judge entered. Everyone rose. I've reviewed the evidence and testimony, the judge began. This case presents complex questions about witness credibility, motivation, and the standard of proof required to uphold a conviction. Elias felt his stomach tighten. The defense has raised valid concerns about the relationship between witnesses and their potential bias. However, bias alone does not negate factual evidence. The physical evidence, the bodies, the weapons, the documented confessions, supports the original conviction. Hale's confident expression started to crack. Furthermore, the defense's attempt to paint this as a conspiracy between Mr. Vance and Miss Hale lacks substantive proof. While their friendship is evident, friendship does not equal conspiracy. The judge looked directly at Hale. The appeal is denied. The original conviction stands. Victor Hale will serve his full sentence. The courtroom erupted. Hale was shouting, Ashford was arguing, people were cheering. Elias sat very still, feeling 6 months of tension drain away. Margaret grabbed his arm. It's over. Yeah. We won. Yeah. She started to say something else, but the crowd pressed in, people wanting to shake their hands, offer congratulations. Elias endured it for 10 minutes, then slipped out the back. He found the mayor and rode out of town without saying goodbye to anyone. He needed to think. Needed space. Needed to figure out what came next now that the fight was finally over. Back on his land, Elias spent 3 days alone. Working, thinking. Sitting by Sarah's grave and trying to sort through everything that had happened. On the 4th day, Margaret showed up. She rode up the trail on a chestnut horse, wearing practical clothes instead of her usual dresses. You left, she said, dismounting. Needed to. Without saying goodbye. Didn't know what to say. Margaret tied her horse and walked over. How about we won? How about it's finally over? Is it? Victor's in prison. His appeal failed. His associates are scattering. She looked at him. What else needs to happen? Elias gestured around them. This. All of this. It's still here, still mine, still something people might want. So you're just going to keep fighting forever? Keep waiting for the next threat? Don't know how to do anything else. Margaret stepped closer. Then learn. How? By letting people in. By accepting that you don't have to carry everything alone. She paused. By admitting that you care about more than just this land. Elias looked at her, at the determination in her eyes, the stubborn set of her jaw. He saw Sarah in that stubbornness. Different woman, different life, but the same refusal to let him hide. I'm not good at this, he said quietly. At what? Caring about people? I lose them, and He stopped. It breaks something. Then maybe stop thinking about losing them. Think about having them instead. That's not how my mind works. Then change how your mind works. Margaret moved closer still. Elias, I'm not asking you to forget Sarah. I'm asking you to remember that you're still alive, and that being alive means more than just surviving. You sound like her. Good. She sounds like she was smart. Despite everything, Elias smiled. She was. Stubborn as hell, but smart. Wonder where she'd want you to be right now. Alone on this hill, or, Margaret gestured between them, or taking a chance on something new. Elias looked at her, really looked, saw the hope and fear mixing on her face, saw the risk she was taking just by being here. He thought about the last 6 years, the isolation, the silence, the careful distance he'd maintained from everyone. And he thought about the last few months, the community, the helping, the slow thawing of something he'd thought was frozen forever. I don't know how to do this, he said again. Neither do I. But we can figure it out together. What if I'm not worth the trouble? Then I'll decide that. Not you. Elias felt something break inside him. Not painfully. More like ice cracking under spring sun. He stepped forward and kissed her. It was awkward at first. He was out of practice, and she was surprised. But then it settled into something real and present and tentatively hopeful. When they pulled apart, Margaret was crying. What's wrong? Elias asked. Nothing. Everything's right. That's why I'm crying. He wiped her tears with his thumb. You're complicated. So are you. We'll match. They stood there in the yard, holding each other as the sun moved across the sky. Finally, Margaret pulled back. I should go. Give you time to process. You could stay. Could I? If you want. She smiled. I want. That evening, they sat on the porch and watched the stars come out, talking about small things, future things, what the valley might become, what they might build together. It wasn't perfect. Elias was still figuring out how to open up, and Margaret was still dealing with her family's legacy. But it was a start. And sometimes, a start was enough. The next morning, Elias walked to the hill behind the house, stood by Sarah's grave under the cottonwood. I met someone, he said quietly. Her name's Margaret. You'd like her. She's stubborn. Doesn't take my nonsense. The wind moved through the branches. I'm going to try to build something new, not to replace what we had. Nothing could do that. But to honor it by not wasting what's left. He stood there for a while longer, then walked back to the house. Margaret was making coffee, humming to herself. Elias watched her for a moment, then joined her. Morning, she said. Morning. What were you doing up there? Saying hello. She understood immediately. Set down the coffee pot and took his hand. Thank you for letting her be part of this. She is, always will be. I know, and that's okay. They had breakfast together. Then Margaret rode back to town, promising to return in a few days. Elias spent the day working on the fence line. Around noon, the Peterson family rode by. Mr. Vance, Peterson called out, wanted to thank you again for everything. You already thanked me. Can't thank you enough, but also, Peterson looked at his wife. We're organizing a winter dance next Saturday. Wanted to invite you. And Miss Hale, if she's around. Elias almost said no out of habit, then caught himself. I'll ask her, he said instead. Peterson grinned. Good. See you there. After they left, Elias stood in his field and looked at the valley. It had changed. Or maybe he had changed. Hard to tell the difference. Either way, it felt less like a fortress now and more like a home. That Saturday, Elias rode into town with the Winchester still on his saddle but his mind on other things. He found Margaret at the hotel, getting ready for the dance. You came, she said, pleased. Said I would. You also said you don't dance. Don't, but I can stand near the wall and watch you dance, she laughed. That's romantic. Best I can do. The dance was held in the town hall, decorated with pine branches and candles. Half the valley showed up. Music played, people talked and ate, children ran wild. Elias did stand near the wall for a while, watching Margaret talk with Ruth and other women, watching the community he'd helped save without fully being part of it. Then Margaret walked over and extended her hand. Dance with me. I told you. I know what you told me. Dance anyway. He let her pull him onto the floor. They moved awkwardly, Elias's wooden leg making the steps difficult. But Margaret was patient, and eventually they found a rhythm. See, she said, not so bad. Still bad, just less bad. I'll take it. As they danced, Elias looked around at the faces. Peterson and his family, Ruth and her husband, the marshal. Dutch. People who'd become more than just neighbors, people who'd become something like friends. The song ended. Another started. Margaret stayed close. What are you thinking? She asked. That this is strange. What is? Being happy. After everything, it feels... He struggled for the word. Unearned. Happiness isn't earned, Elias. It's chosen. You fought for this valley. You protected these people. You survived when you had every reason not to. She looked up at him. If that doesn't earn some happiness, I don't know what does. But the cost was high. I know, but you paid it, and now you get to live with what you bought. Elias thought about that, about the bodies and the barn burning and the nights of no sleep, about Sarah's grave on the hill and the promise he'd made, about standing his ground when leaving would have been easier. Okay, he said finally. Okay? I'll try. To be happy. To build something. Margaret smiled and it was like sunrise. That's all anyone can do. They danced until midnight, then walked back to the hotel under a sky full of stars. At the door, Margaret turned to him. Stay. People will talk. Let them. I'm tired of caring what people think. Elias looked at her. at the invitation, at the future she was offering. He thought about Sarah, about what she'd want, about the difference between honoring a memory and being trapped by it. "All right," he said. They went inside together. And if it wasn't perfect, if Elias still woke sometimes reaching for a gun that wasn't there, if Margaret still carried the weight of her family's sins, that was okay. Because perfect wasn't the point. Living was. Choosing was. Standing your ground when it mattered, but also knowing when to let someone stand with you. The winter came hard that year, but Elias and Margaret weathered it together. He split his time between his land and town, slowly learning how to be part of something larger than himself. The valley grew. New families came. Old wounds healed, though the scars remained. Victor Hale died in prison 3 years later. Heart attack. Some said it was justice. Others said it was mercy. Elias didn't say anything at all, just kept living, kept building. 5 years after that first kiss, Elias and Margaret were married in a small ceremony by the cottonwood tree. Sarah's grave nearby, part of the day instead of a shadow over it. "You think she approves?" Margaret asked as they stood together, rings exchanged. Elias looked at the grave, then at his new wife. "Yeah, I think she does." "How do you know?" "Because she loved me, and people who love you want you to keep living even after they're gone." Margaret kissed him. "That's the smartest thing you've ever said." "Don't get used to it." They built a life together. Not easy, not simple, but real. Elias never fully shook the instinct to prepare for the next fight. Still cleaned the Winchester every week. Still checked the fence lines and watched the trails. But he also learned to sit on the porch with Margaret in the evenings, to help neighbors without waiting for crisis, to attend dances and dinners and all the small rituals that made a community. The valley remembered him as the man who stood alone against impossible odds. But Elias knew the truth. He hadn't stood alone. Not really. He'd stood for something, for the land, for the promise, for the people who couldn't stand for themselves. And in the end, that standing had connected him to more people than isolation ever could. Years passed. The wooden leg wore out and he carved a new one. His hair went gray. Margaret's too. The valley prospered. The Peterson kids grew up and started their own farms. The town expanded. Life went on, the way it always did. One evening, when Elias was nearly 70, he sat by Sarah's grave with Margaret beside him. "Do you regret it?" Margaret asked. "Staying, fighting, all of it." Elias thought about the question, about the bodies, and the fire, and the fear, about the cost. "No," he said finally. "I did what I had to do, and it led me here." To an old man with a wooden leg and too many memories? He smiled. To a life that mattered. That's enough. Margaret took his hand. More than enough. They sat there until the sun set, then walked back to the house together. Inside, Elias opened Sarah's journal one last time. The pages were yellow now, filled with years of entries. He turned to a fresh page and wrote, "This will be my last entry. Not because the story's over, it never really is, but because I've said what needed saying. I kept the promise, held the land, built something that lasted. But more than that, I learned that standing your ground doesn't mean standing alone. It means knowing what you're willing to fight for, and knowing when fighting means accepting help. Sarah taught me how to love. The valley taught me how to survive. Margaret taught me how to live again. Not bad lessons for one lifetime. If anyone reads this someday, and I don't know why they would, remember this. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right despite it. And sometimes the hardest fight isn't the one with guns and fire. Sometimes it's the fight to stay human, to care, to build instead of destroy. That's the fight worth winning." He signed it, dated it, and closed the journal for the last time. Outside, the valley stretched quiet under the stars. The land he'd fought for, the home he'd built, the life he'd chosen. Elias Vance had been many things: bounty hunter, widower, fighter, survivor. But in the end, he was simply a man who stood his ground when it mattered, and discovered that the ground he stood on was meant to be shared. That was enough. It had always been enough.